Annette Prince has been involved with Chicago Bird Collision Monitors since 2004. She's been director since 2005. She's been on the board of the Chicago Bird Alliance, which was formerly Chicago Audubon, for 20 years. She is also involved in Bird Friendly Chicago, which is working on an ordinance for bird collisions in Chicago. But also, I just have to say, she is an enormously devoted person to birds and saving birds. And so that, you know, I'm on one of these hotline calls, and there are about, you know, I don't know, 30 to 40 calls a day. It's just amazing the number of birds that Annette is responsible for rescuing. And even if they're dead, getting them to the Field Museum to keep data on the number of bird collisions in Chicago. So I'm really, really happy you're here.
Hey, yes, as Leslie said, our group began in 2003. I got involved in 2004. We're a grassroots, not-for-profit organization dedicated to migratory bird protection and rescue. Advance my slide with it down there. Wait. Advance my slide. Oh, there you go. That's good. Okay, so Chicago, we're number one, but unfortunately, the thing that we're number one in is killing birds. We pose the greatest risk of any city in North America, well, in the United States, by virtue of a couple factors. We are the elements that our city faces are the idea that we are a major migratory path for birds, which for thousands of years before we even had buildings here, millions of birds are programmed to come through our area. And we have, at one point, it was a very safe and advantageous way to travel from southern wintering grounds up to southern wintering grounds and going up to northern breeding areas. But we have unfortunately built our cities along some of the waterways that they used for their advantageous travel. And now we've got the city with the most urban lighting at night. Attracts birds toward the urban areas, and you add the amount of glass that we have in our built environment, you've got the perfect equation for being ranked as the city that essentially harm as many birds. We certainly have evidence from the years that we've worked with birds that many birds die here, and the equation just fits, unfortunately, because of all these elements. That below us come Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, and then below us. Again, these are birds that are traveling hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles. They want to spend their summers breeding up in northern parts of the United States and Canada, where there are rich forested areas that they can find plenty of food. There's an abundance in the summer of insects for them to raise their young. Then they're traveling someplace where they can continue to find food in the winter, which are places in the southern United States, some as far south as South America. These tiny little birds are probably one of the biggest spectacles of nature, that they're traveling. Some birds that weigh a few ounces are traveling hundreds of thousands of distances that they do every year of their lives, 10, 15-year span of life, and that they must do in order to raise their young and find. And the majority of migratory birds travel in the winter and in the nighttime. It's safer at night. They can make their travels. They use navigation of stars and the moon. And they can then spend the daytime resting. So they take off around sunset, fly as far as they can, depending on the weather conditions. And then they're settling in once they've reached where they're going. But unfortunately, while they're flying at night and using lights above them, in the past, the ground underneath them was a dark landscape, and above them they just had the lights that they would use for orientation. Now, the pattern of stars that they would normally use up above is a pattern of lights below them, which can confuse. It throws off their navigation systems. They use magnetic fields, and light plays an important element in what they measure as to how they direct themselves when they're migrating, and the bright lights attract and confuse them. A lot of people don't realize that. Wrong button, I hit down. Frozen again. Here, let me tap this. There we go. I'm on it. A lot of people don't realize that the tribune lights that goes up in New York City in honor of the Twin Towers that fell on September 11th. First put up October 11th, and if you're a bird watcher, you'll be aware of the fact that October 11th is probably the peak of migration. It killed thousands of birds the first year that they put it up because it's not even a structure, it's just these two beams of light that project into the sky, and they've tracked birds that travel dozens and dozens of miles off route to be pulled toward this, like, it's like a magnet for, you look at, there's the two beams. It looks almost like insects in that light, and those are just hundreds of birds. They fly toward the light, which attracts, again, and confuses them, and they circle until they either drop dead from exhaustion, run into nearby buildings. They continue to do this every September 11th, and to me, something that's a monument for senseless loss of life shouldn't be causing more senseless loss of life. The New York City Audubon goes there and tries to turn the lights out. A lot of birds show up and get trapped in the lighting, but these birds have still been pulled off their migratory route and brought into harm's way, spending energy to come to this attractive event. So that's how strong light can have an effect on birds. New York, here in Chicago, we have McCormick Place, which through several years of study, it was found that on the nights of McCormick Place, which sits out as one of the furthest points east on a darkened lakefront, if their lights are left on inside and they don't block it off with shades or drapes, and attract birds. And on the nights when the lights weren't on, they had an 83% fewer bird deaths. So they proved that just the simple act of turning lights out at McCormick Place could reduce bird deaths. And McCormick Place always says that they use the phrase, we save 83% birds by turning our lights out. That means when they turn their lights out, they save 83%, but they are not turning their lights out all the time. Very, very seldom do they turn their lights out. So they use the sentence, you know, we are able to save 83% of the birds, but that quote is not valid if they're not really doing it. They're talking about what they could do, which resulted in what happened on October 5th, 2023, in which in a single morning, 1,000 birds died at McCormick Place. And we had 2,000 additional birds that died in downtown Chicago. Birds were drawn off the lakefront by the lights that were left on at McCormick Place. It was a night of heavy migration because it was in the fall when birds like to travel when there's a north wind. We hadn't had north winds for several weeks, for at least a week's worth of time. The birds had built up waiting to move, and then all of a sudden north winds came in that were going to help them. A front was coming into Chicago. There was low cloud cover, which brought the birds down toward the buildings, and then McCormick Place left its lights on that night and gave the birds this very hazardous attraction that came in. Even they were traveling in huge numbers, so it was the perfect storm of conditions that killed 1,000 birds at one time with additional, who knows how many more that were dead. And the birds that probably poured into the city could also have been attracted by the lights that acts almost like a lighthouse on the lakefront because the birds are traveling and got nothing but darkness, and it's almost like a lighthouse that's shining when the lights on. So what is McCormick Place doing about it? Following what happened on October 5th, they have been petitioned to, as they have been for 40 years, to do something about this issue because this building has been killing 1,000 birds a year for over 40 years. It's unfortunate that 1,000 of them died in one night, but it's certainly got the attention of Fish and Wildlife and the community to demand, as they've been asked to do something 40 years, more than 40,000 birds have died and been injured in the meantime. But the key element is that for them to draw these drapes that they have, and they have these very huge, unwieldy drapes. It takes people in lift trucks and scissors with hooks to pull them. It takes a long time to pull them, and then in the morning, someone's got to come and open them up again. So they've never been very eager or willing to pull those drapes because of the time it takes. But they are now, since October 5th, during migration, pulling those drapes and also looking for a more efficient system because now in 1970, when this building was built, they didn't have a lot of fancy high-level shading systems, but now there's all sorts of light-blocking, automated electronic shades that they could install that wouldn't be this prohibitive ordeal of pulling these drapes. They're hopefully going to install something that one push of a button, the shades go down. They can leave the lights on inside in the evening if they need to, and the light blocking curtains will protect the birds. This is a simple technology. This wasn't even something space age that they had to do. They really just had to have the will either fix or pull those drapes. Hopefully they're going to draw the drapes they have, install better drapes in the future, and they are going to try to put treatments on the glass, outside surface of the glass they have almost 2 football fields of glass. That's a lot of glass. They may not fix all of it at once, but they're going to certainly fix the critical areas, which would be the side of the building. East side is where the birds are most likely to come in off the lakefront and encounter first. So I think they're certainly going to try to address the most critical sides of the building and hopefully that glass with the sort of things that prevent them. Regardless of lights or no lights, after birds have flown all night, they want to settle in and land somewhere. And if they happen to be right next to the city, they're flying in from the lakefront, they're flying down the Chicago River and looking for any kind of area that's a green space where they could spend the day resting, hiding, finding food. And the city is kind of a maze of a lot of confusing glass. Glass is the thing that ultimately kills the birds. Lights may attract them, but the ultimate thing that's dangerous for birds are glass elements to buildings that are either transparent. The building on the far left, to get to those plants, those yellow flowers, a bird would think they should just fly directly towards it. You and I kind of see the frame of that building. We can think that there's something in our way and we would walk around the corner to get to those flowers, but a bird really thinks it's the fastest way to get there is to fly straight towards what's an invisible barrier that they don't understand. And the other problem with glass is when it becomes reflective. All glass on the outside could bounce light off and look almost like it's a piece of sky. That building in the upper right-hand corner almost disappears. In a bird's view, it looks like there's nothing there to stop them from, or vegetation. In the picture in the lower right-hand corner, they see trees and gardens that look like real images that they should be able to. I've seen birds fly toward a building like the one in the upper right, hit the solid surface of glass and pull back and fly into it again, because they just have no comprehension. There's something that's preventing them from flying. It's as if I tried to walk across this room, I hit something halfway across. I don't see anything between me and the other side of this room. And these birds can't understand it and haven't had experience with glass. They spend all their time in those southern areas and in rainforests and natural areas in South America, and then they're summer times up in forested areas up in northern parts of it. So glass is a very unfamiliar thing for them to adapt to and learn about. City birds like pigeons and sparrows that spend all their time next to buildings have a greater understanding, and we see those birds less often as bird strikes because they've spent their lives kind of bumping into surfaces and understanding surfaces there. But the birds that we're seeing that are migratory birds that don't live in Chicago but are traveling across the globe, glass and urban lighting are new concepts. There we go. So our group was formed. It was our 20th anniversary. As I said, it was 2003. We were formed by Robbie Hunsinger, a woman who was a musician, who wasn't an ornithologist. She was a person who just saw that there was really a serious problem here. Birds were dying. Lights were being left on, even though Chicago had a light reduction program. She wanted to work with building management and get out to the downtown areas where these birds needed to be collected, documented, and hopefully rescued if there was a way for us to protect them and give them a second chance. As Leslie mentioned, the dead birds that we pick up all go to the Field Museum. So even though we regret that they have perished, they're at least not going to be just thrown away. They have a use for understanding other species. They're going to be used for study, education, display purposes, and hopefully maybe finding more ways that we can understand more about how they travel, when they travel, and what their vision is like. Injured birds are rescued and put in these little paper bags where we transport them off to the Willowbrook Wildlife Center. Pick up anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 birds a year, and about 30% of them are injured, and the majority of those injured birds do get a chance to be released out in the forest preserve. The dead birds, as I said, the 70% of what we find used for knowledge and documentation of the scope of the problem, because if you went downtown Chicago after 9, 10 o'clock every morning, anything that was dead would be swept up, thrown away by then. And the fact that we're documenting more than 10,000 birds a year down there, just that 1 or 2 square miles that we look, shows the magnitude of the problem. And we know we don't find everything. We only find a percentage of what makes it to where we can. We banned all the birds that we release. The idea that we hope to find them again and see how they survived, see how well they did, and we have recovered some of them. We know they're not going out in the woods and kind of passing. So that's part of our work. We find over 200 different kinds of birds. Birds that are just not normally here in Chicago. They're just something that we're very fortunate to host. Beautiful little warblers, hummingbirds, indigo buntings, grosbeaks. They're birds that they're not Chicago birds. They belong to the planet, and they're right here in our backyard being harmed, and we have an ability to do something here the birds we find the most often, these are probably the 2 species we find most often, white-throated sparrows and little brown creepers. All of these birds are declining in severe numbers, and the fact that we're losing them in collisions is just we're concerned about having this as another hazard for them. This is an oven bird, which is a little warbler we find the most often, and hermit thrushes. Woodpeckers we find the most often are migratory woodpeckers. Some woodpeckers stay in Chicago year-round. Our hairy and downy woodpeckers are here all the time. This is a yellow-bellied sapsucker on the left side, and a northern flicker on the right side. Both birds that fly on warmer temperatures to find their food. Flickers eat ants, and they have to go where they're mating in the winter. They go down to the Caribbean, America, in the southern U.S., and sapsuckers too, either places in Central America where, as their name implies, they drill holes in trees for sap to run in climates where the temperature is freezing. They can't in the winter. Now, they also get golden crowned kinglets in large numbers, slate-colored juncos, and the American woodcock, which is kind of the bird du jour. We're getting a lot of woodpeckers, and the American woodcocks are birds that are coming through first thing in the spring, and we're getting quite a few of them recorded in the past couple weeks. We work with the idea of more exterior lighting reductions. The top lighting on buildings in Chicago go out after 11 p.m. We have pretty good participation voluntarily on the buildings downtown to have any other display lighting. That would be antenna light, logos, clock faces, anything that's going to pour light up into the sky. And we really want to encourage buildings to have any of their other external lighting to be shielded or downward facing for the benefit of giving us dark skies, for the benefit of not having anything that attracts birds. Anything that's inside of a lobby, we would like to see be something that's on a timer, such that their lights that aren't needed on the inside of a building go out when no one's using the room, only come up. Perhaps motion sensor when they're walking through an area. So we want as much dark sky as possible for the benefit. We are encouraging buildings to build with bird-friendlier designs, which ultimately means using less glass. We have an aesthetic of people that really like to have glass buildings. Apple particularly likes to build its buildings as sort of invisible glass cubes. The more glass you have in a building, the more places and opportunities for birds to be injured. It doesn't matter how tall your building is. It isn't just tall buildings that kill birds. It's any building, in any size of glass. But certainly the more glass you put in, the more you up the odds. There's more places where a bird could get hurt. Unfortunately, buildings strive to get LEED status, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. They give gold, platinum status for whether your building has the amount of recycling and other environmental. And unfortunately, they use a lot of glass. So some of the biggest bird killers are buildings that are high standards in LEED, and it's kind of ironic because leading in environmental design shouldn't be a building that kills birds, but such that you don't have to use as much energy because you use natural light. Many of the LEED buildings use an awful lot of glass. There are ways to design around light, having glass, but having it in such a way that buildings aren't presenting a scary, hazardous aspect for birds. Here are buildings that use a lot of glass, but they've done it in a bird-friendly way. This is the Robert Crown Center in Evanston that just went up, built with the intent to be bird friendly, and the glass that they use has patterns in it. So there's a lot of light, there's a lot of glass, but there's patterning on that glass that when a bird approaches it, they see something that's in their way. You can see the frosted glass in that upper right-hand corner where a lot of light is coming in, but this very beautiful pattern of frosting makes it look to a bird as though there's no open space to fly through. The Buck Stadium that's in Milwaukee has achieved the bird-friendly LEED credit. A lot of glass, but all the glass has a very fine black line striping on it. Still see in, you can still see out. You barely notice the lines, but it's enough to keep birds from and striking the surface. This is the Hazardous Museum that's in downtown Chicago on Michigan Avenue. Again, very bright inside that interior, so they get the light that they want, but there are tiny ceramic dots on that glass. For distance, kind of give the glass a little bit of a cloudy look, and if you look up close, you can see little dots. And those dots look like something that are a barrier, and birds will not fly toward them. They use glass, but design in a way that still keeps it safe for birds. You can put barriers in front of glass. You can have all the glass you want, and this is the TV center that has glass windows, but these sunscreens sit in front. So the first thing when a bird approaches this building, it will land on will be these shutters that are sitting in front of the glass, and it helps shade and prevent the interior from overheating anyway. And then the New York Times building has a set of piping that goes all the way down the front of their building, which is decorative. It wasn't done for bird safety's sake, but it puts a barrier between birds and the glass. And then there's a Belly's athletic health club that's got sunshade grill work that is a barrier between birds and in your own home. You can put things like in front of your glass. You can. I redid my windows, and I've got external screens that just sit in front of the glass. So any bird approaching one of my windows is going to land or bounce off of the screening. It helps my house reduce heating costs in the summer because it has a shading effect, so it's energy efficient for me. You can hang cords of different types. These Acopian bird savers are a cord system that just every 3 or 4 inches, there's a parachute cord that hangs down. On the inside, you can barely see it looking out. It doesn't obstruct your view. But it's enough that birds see something that's between them and the glass. And if they bump into that or see the hanging cords in front of their windows, it's enough for them to want to avoid. Something as simple as hanging wind socks or ribbons in front of your windows breaks up the two things that you have to do. You've got to stop bird from seeing in with transparency. You have to have it on the outside so that the reflections get broken up. I had a cardinal that was flying into that kitchen window, and she saw her reflection, and she continued to hit the glass. We had a goose that knocked himself out trying to hit a glass window, chase away what he thought was a competitor the other day. But when the ribbons were there, all the bird sees is the moving ribbons. They don't look beyond to the surface of glass that could have their reflection or reflection of a tree. And cardinal left and stopped bothering the window when something that was like a distracting element. And temporary banners at buildings to something between birds and glass. You could do something on the outside surface of glass that's patterned. You could do temporary paints. You can do very attractive designs, the pens that Leslie was talking about. You can do simple designs. You can make patterns that you can leave up during migration and wash off, but they can give you that effect that the birds see something in their way. What doesn't work is just one or a few hawk decals. Some people want to put up one hawk decal. They think that birds will avoid the whole surface of glass. It's like an easy out. Buy one of these things, you put it up, you got the rest of your window. Birds will avoid the space where that silhouette is and nothing else. The picture in the lower right-hand corner is the Art Institute in Chicago, where they put silhouettes of owls, and maybe 4 or 5, 6 of them. But the birds will strike any place of that glass where there isn't an owl silhouette. They're not going to avoid the entire surface of glass. And that's just kind of a very common misconception of people that a few decals are going to help. There's a rule called the 2x4 rule, or some people, to be safer, even go 2x2, that any little bird fits through any space that's the size of his body, which is about 2 inches high, and about his wingspan about 4 inches. And hummingbirds are 2x2. You never want to have any glass area that gives a bird a space that looks bigger than that, because they'll navigate through it because they're used to navigating through branches that have that opening. You have to have a very dense distribution. One or two decals don't cut it. There are window films that it can easily give you a uniform coverage of your glass. I think that, again, it looks beautiful from the outside. It looks almost impenetrable to a bird, but from the inside, you can still see out. Some of these films almost give you like a two-way effect where you haven't lost your view out the window, but birds certainly see something that doesn't look like it's. There's a product called Solex, which gives a window film that is a very nice stripe effect. On the outside, that upper picture shows you something that birds would say there's no way I can get in there. But from the inside, if you look down below in the lower right-hand corner, that's what it looks like from the inside. Very much not blocking your view out, very much letting light in. So films can give you a nice uniform coverage of glass that gives birds that visual signal. You want it on the outside surface because the outside surface is going to stop birds from being able to see through, and it's going to break up reflections. If you put any film or drapes or anything on the inside, the outside surface of glass remains shiny and reflective, and you've gotten rid of the problem, which is a product that is commercially called Kaleidoscape. Sometimes it's called bus wrap. It's the thing when you see a bus that looks like Spider-Man or something on the outside, but can't see in, but people from the inside can see out. It almost is two-way glass. There's a building in Milwaukee that has covered a glass cube, kind of like one of the Apple glass cubes. They've covered it with this bus wrap perforated vinyl. This is a static cling film, and they silk screen this beautiful flower pattern. So they turn the whole building into kind of a bouquet of flowers, which you can't see into, and birds would say that's a solid wall. I am not flying towards that. But on the inside, you'd be able to look. You can do a dot pattern. You can add pieces of, this is a cut vinyl markers that go on every 2 inches. They can be put on as a solid sheet, or you can put them on individually in rows. Again, not really obstructing your view in or out. At some point, pretty unnoticeable, so they haven't ruined the look of the building, and yet they're giving birds a spacing image that they say they can't. Other products, you can go to our webpage and look up some of these suggested products, what they look like on your windows. We're at www.birdmonitors.net. We work with buildings to retrofit problems. This is the Chicago Botanic Garden that put up these mirror-like glass buildings. Again, not a tall building, just a first-story building, but such a perfect mirror. Birds were hitting those windows because the plants were reflected. The first year, they just painted these huge, enormous dots all over the windows to try to give birds something to be in the way. Now they just stretch netting on the outside during spring and fall migration, and that netting lets light in, lets people look out from the inside. Just looks like there's screens on the window, and yet birds can't encounter the glass that way. Northwestern here in Evanston took one of their worst buildings that had this mirrored glass, the Francis Searle building, and they added that Solex striped film on it. If you look really closely, you can see the striping on that building, but it doesn't really, once you're just a few feet away, you can barely notice the stripes. From the inside, it doesn't affect looking out. And that building went from being one of the worst buildings on campus because of how reflective and deceptive it was to being a building we almost never find birds at. And I've seen birds fly towards these buildings and turn at the last minute when they see those bars that look as though they can't fit. We work with the Kellogg Global Hub building at Northwestern, which is several stories worth of glass facing the lakefront. So it's in a bad position because it's right on the lakefront. It's right by landscaping where birds are spending their daytime, and it's both reflective and they've added that dot pattern to be something that's visible for birds and causes them to avoid any of the areas of the building. They haven't done every surface in that building, but the areas where they have added the dot pattern, we see more than reduction. We worked with the issue of the Carvana Tower that was going to go up in Skokie. If you remember that from a couple of years ago, they were going to build a tower that was going to be lit, that was going to be see-through, and that was going to be right next to the Woods, where birds were spending their time right near the Chicago River and right by the Chicago Botanic Garden. It would have been something that was lit at night, attracting birds, and then also looked as though that project was willing to fix a third of the building. They weren't willing to fix the entire building, but then Carvana kind of circled the drain and disappeared. So they, and Skokie implemented in the process when Carvana lost its license in Illinois, Skokie implemented bird-friendly requirements. So when Carvana reapplied to build on that property, Skokie told them, well, now we've got a higher standard that you kind of first came around, they didn't have restrictions for bird-friendly building, but when they reapplied to build, they realized they would have had a higher standard of protection for birds, which was a really good win for Skokie and for their future other buildings. And Carvana is now, I think, selling the property. We work with the casino in Chicago that's supposed to go up right on the Chicago River. It's going to have a lot of glass. It's an area where all the buildings that are already in that area are dangerous bird strike buildings, and we've talked to them about what, if they use glass, how to make it safer for their buildings. The Obama Center is going up right in Jackson Park, which is a major migratory route for birds and a natural area that is pretty cherished by bird watchers. The tower itself has got that grill work that you see. There's glass in the tower, but it's all covered by a very beautiful decorative grill. So they'll have light, they'll have glass, but they'll have this protected side part. We're a little concerned they're building an athletic center next to the tower at the Obama Center, which has a lot of glass, as you can see from the rendering of it, and we're hoping that they have taken the advice that they're going to use glass, that they should those elements of protection either in front or out. We formed Bird Friendly Chicago, working with Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, Chicago Bird Alliance, and the Chicago Ornithological Society to get an ordinance in Chicago that was going to require that buildings must meet these basic standards for protecting birds from the start on any new building. We wrote up requirements and what areas were most critical, because we know maybe you cannot fix an entire building, but there are areas from the first 75 feet, and then areas such as bridges, walkways, glass corners that are critical. And so we wrote requirements. We hope that the city would make mandatory for anything that was going through permitting processes. We started working on those in 2020. It's been 4 years and the city still hasn't implemented them. In the meantime, though, Evanston and Skokie took the requirements that we wrote and used them and did pass them to be implemented for new designs and major renovations in your towns. Chicago continues to hold off on implementing these things. They were going to put them in their new sustainability plan as requirements, as something that really is critical to whether something lives or dies at these buildings. They recently told us though it was going to go into effect in 2024, they may just make these optional. And so we're asking people who are concerned and willing to help us out with this to write in to both Mayor Johnson and to the Department of Planning and Development to tell them that the city must require these bird-friendly elements, just the way you wouldn't give it an option whether you had a smoke alarm or whether you had a sprinkler system, whether you had handicap access for people. Those are things that are important for life and safety, and bird-friendly requirements don't have to cost more. They're available, they're achievable, they're affordable, and if you plan them from the start, they don't even have to cost anything more. There's something we've been told that, well, it might slow down development because you have to order special things. Any of the products that are bird-friendly are available as readily as standard glass products. So all the excuses not to do it are disappointing us, that they are not simply saying that being the leading city in killing birds in the United States, we ought to be the leading city. We're going to find out when they release the new sustainable development policy on April 15th of this month. We're going to find out whether they say that it's just extra points that you can choose to earn, or whether it's going to be mandatory. And when you write into the city Department of the Environment, Planning, or the Mayor Johnson, say that this new sustainability plan policy needs this to be mandatory. It should not just be a choice, because it's already been something you could earn points for since 2016, and almost no project since 2016 they have chosen to earn points. So unless it's mandated, we're just not going to see it happen. So the other thing that we need is volunteers. We have a program at Northwestern where we help document where the bird strikes are occurring on campus for Northwestern, because that way we can direct the university to where they should their emphasis. We know nobody can fix all the buildings that exist right away, but if we can show them the critical locations and they can focus on budgeting to fix those buildings, we can see significant decreases in bird strikes. And so we want to help any building that exists find ways to fix what is already a hazard. We need volunteers to join teams downtown. We need volunteers to help monitor and look for birds at Western, and we need people just to respond. As Leslie said, we have a helpline number that gets about 10,000 calls a year, and we respond to people that have found birds not only downtown Chicago or the campuses, because we work with other campus programs, but anywhere throughout the Chicago region. If you found an injured bird, that's the number to call. The webpage, if you want to learn more about volunteering, is up there. We need help to help more birds, and since we are a not-for-profit organization, we're not funded by anyone. All of our work that we do, our phone line costs, our equipment costs, our transportation costs, are all funded by nations. That's our webpage, and you can find out more about us. And there's a sign-up sheet if you think you want to hear more about volunteering. A table outside the meeting room. Time or anyone has questions, let me know. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your coming. So if we do have questions, anyone have questions?
Well, thank you very much. It was fascinating. And I don't have so much a question as I heard Dan Clem, who's an American ornithologist, speak, I think it was in October or November at the Evanston Bird Club. And his whole life has been committed to bird collision and has written books. And I think his latest book is Glass Air, Solid Air. Yeah, which is so perfect to describe this situation. So I just wanted to, if you wanted to add any more words to him, and he was. No,
I definitely think that he has worked with us since the inception of our program. He's come to Chicago and consulted with us. I know Dr. Clem real well, and his book Solid Air is something you definitely could read and learn more about. He's probably the national expert on what we need to do about preventing collisions, and he has just a great understanding of what goes on, and has helped us understand what we need to do to prevent. They have not been willing to change that all glass aesthetic that they have on all of their. Every city's got an Apple building, always this glass. They said that, well, they're willing to turn lights out, but if you turn lights out on a glass cube, it doesn't matter. Transparency is transparency. If you have a building that's got a wall behind it and you turn the lights out, the building gets dark. You can't turn the lights out on a cube. The lights from all around shine through it, and it still sits as an invisible set of walls, and solid air is what it looks like. They have not been, we've presented them with options. Every once in a while they promote. The funny thing is they were promoting their new titanium phone. I don't know Apple much. They got window film that had little gray bubbles and pictures of the titanium phone, and they covered one side of their building to advertise the phone, and it helped the birds, so they were willing to do that for advertising. But maybe permanently they could get something that was attractively advertising their products. They could put these kind of window films up that had images of their phone or their product. They could have glass that had little etched apples all over it. Often the things that you do for bird friendly can enhance them. You have to be covering it, with a paper bag because it's ugly. We can put really attractive features that enhance the look and give birds protection. That's what we try to tell. And a lot of the architects we talk to, because we give classes to them about bird safe design, a lot of them don't hear about this, and we try to give them classes to make them aware of it. They say they don't mind being creative and designing for bird safety, but it's the developers and their customers that have this, I want the building to look invisible. When I'm inside the building, I want it to see as though I'm outside. And tell inside from outside, and they would be happy to have an ordinance or a policy that said that bird-friendly design had to be incorporated, because then they could tell their clients, you know, I'd love to make this all glass building for you, but I'm going to have to add elements of glass that will be attractive. I'll design you a nice looking building, but it's going to have to be bird friendly, because that's what the code is here. And that's what we feel is really going to drive this forward. And the other thing that will drive it forward, people say that, well, it's hard to come by some of these products that are bird friendly, or they might be more expensive. The more people that are compelled to use it, the more companies are going to make it, the more prices are going to go down, the more choices there are going to be. And the whole process is just going to become easier and easier to do. It will become just something that everybody does. It's like you wouldn't design a building that wasn't handicap accessible right now. I think when people first said that buildings had to have ramps and elevators and handicap accessible bathrooms, there were people that said, what's this going to cost? What's it going to take? Got to, change my whole building in order to accommodate this. It was the right thing to do. So no one would design a building without those features now. No one would design a building without fire protection and smoke detectors and sprinkler systems. And this is not a question of whether we save more or less energy or how the building looks. This is whether in the life of that building, thousands of birds are going to die unnecessarily. Like, if we have a way to fix this, it's something that it's a shame. There's some problems that they're so complex we don't really even know how to go about changing them or fixing them. We really know, thanks to people like Dr. Clem, we know ways to make buildings safer. It's just the will to do it is all that's lacking at this point. We really could make this happen, and it will just be another requirement that every building has all sorts of safety requirements, and this is safety for these birds who are irreplaceable. And I really wouldn't be acceptable if this building killed people. It would fix it and make people use products that didn't kill people or anything. So, and in the 4 years of delay that the Chicago Department of Planning hasn't implemented this requirement for their building permits. It won't be for every building in Chicago, but it'll be anything that goes through the building permitting process, the planning department. In those 4 years that we've been ready to launch these mandatory requirements, dozens and dozens of buildings have gone up that are going to kill thousands and thousands of birds. So every time they delay and they don't put these measures in practice, we're shuddering at the idea of all the new buildings that are slipping through and not being required. It's a tragedy that the delay is caused very large scale.
Great. Well, I want to just check chat and just see if there are more questions to be asking about on the chat. Not too much. Is there a paint that can withstand Chicago weather for the outside of windows? Think of an effect like the Chagall windows at the Art Institute. Well, if you're going to use a temporary paint, it can sometimes take a beating with weathering. So we sometimes have people put these things up temporarily and take them down. We had a time when we had artists come down and paint some of the windows, and there were a few of them that were on the east side of a building with the prevailing easterlies we get in the spring, and just kind of watch the paint rip off. So it really was a little bit of a problem for durability. I don't know that paint would be something that I think you'd always have to think that you'd only have it up temporarily as a permanent. Sure. Something like some of those window films are very durable. I have a friend that uses that Kaleidoscape, and it's durable for the winter. It's durable for washing. There's a certain point if there's intense sunlight that they can start to fade or change for their patterns. But the window films are generally pretty durable for both cold temperatures and rain and adverse effects. So thank you so much, Annette. Thank you.